We can't really see into the future. We can't jump forward. We get a sneak peek from time to time on what's on the horizon, just to keep us interested, just to keep dangling the carrot in front of us. We can't be guaranteed anything in the future, but we can take a look at what's behind us, what was created before us, what once was. With the rise of vintage styling and aesthetic, it appears some of us humans are chasing retro dreams. Maybe this is why vintage lenses and vintage gear is becoming such a desirable thing, why it's becoming more and more popular over the years. If we start to look at the rise of tech and all its wizardry, bringing out new and improved camera systems, autofocus becoming better and better and better, options on camera systems and what's included within becoming off the charts, and a wide selection of shiny new glass to attach to our digital bodies. Has this led us to forget about our past? I wonder, has our move away from the manual way of photography, the manual way of doing things, such as winding a lever, have we started to go in the other direction? Are we trying to become more and more connected to the past, more connected to what once was? Are we craving something more analog? Hey everyone, welcome to the Vintage Hideout. If you're a fan of vintage lenses, then this is the place for you. Whether or not you see it on social media, in the world of the professional cinematographers, photographers, or even here just on YouTube, everyone seems to be loving the aesthetics of the vintage styling. Why are these old lenses making such a comeback, and why are they so desirable? Well, in this video, we're going to have a little look. I've been slowly becoming more and more addicted to buying old vintage glass, old lenses. Inevitably fascinated with how well old holds up. I often go looking for them on the bay or around old thrift stores, Goodwill stores, old markets. You never know what you're going to find. The thrill of that everlasting hunt for the elusive unicorn find is exciting. We'll let the hunt continue and stay with me to find out why glass from the past is here to stay. Vintage lenses have captured the essence of cinematic history. In today's world of digital perfection, it might seem strange that these old school lenses are making a comeback. But once you start to take a closer look, you'll see why they're more than just a nostalgic feeling. These vintage lenses, this old glass, they offer some kind of unique magic that modern lenses just can't replicate. Come with me and let's dive into the exploration of why vintage lenses are so wonderful to use and how the retro film style has come trampling back into today's world. I'd like to firstly start talking about what makes vintage lenses so unique. So unlike modern lenses that are designed with digital sensors in mind, many of these old vintage lenses were designed for film cameras and film photography. And in the past, way back then, I feel like the focus was more on creating a rich, organic, characterful frame. Something that to me is looking harder and harder to replicate with today's modern technology. We're inundated with tech, new tech from a couple years ago that is still absolutely sublime. So why do I keep getting drawn back to the vintage look? So we hear this term thrown around quite a lot, and that is that vintage has character. Those characteristics we can start to define as that softer focus, that dreamy look, the more pronounced lens flares that you might get. And obviously, how can we forget about the bokeh? These qualities, these characteristics can really start to give your photos and your videos that more cinematic look that almost feels more alive, but also more alive than today's modern tech. And also, it starts to be a little bit imperfect. Now, imperfection is a great word here, one that we often associate with being flawed and not very nice. Something that is imperfect usually isn't very desirable. At least that is until you get to a little bit of photography. The aesthetic of imperfection these days is now quite desirable. I feel like it's a little bit trendy. In today's world where every image is pixel perfect, that clinicalness shines through on some videos, that really clean look that you see in movies such as the Marvel franchise, there's something to be said about using an imperfect lens to create a more gritty, characterful frame. That imperfection, I feel, starts to really draw people in. Life isn't perfect, so why should our frames be perfect? Why should our video be perfect? That's a question for you. And I think a lot of us, either just starting out in photography or even videography or deep into the game, we're all looking for that little bit of character that might start to set us apart from the crowd. That character that is raw, the character that is unannounced, the character that feels real, imperfect, and something that can't be replicated through a little bit of editing software. For me, these vintage lenses start to add more depth, a different kind of layer to your frame. A layer of emotion, should we call it, that clinically modern glass can't provide without editing. In fact, photographers and filmmakers lean towards that raw, emotional, characterful, imperfect frame to evoke some kind of emotion, to evoke a little bit of nostalgia. The vintage glass starts to create something a little bit more timeless, and it can really be used to start to enhance storytelling a little bit more. And that's why I'm really digging these old vintage lenses. I know for a fact that when I hook one up to my digital body, I'm going to be met with an image straight out of camera that I quite like. With the rise of retro, and with the rise of the retro film style, I think it's not just the gear, not the vintage lenses, that's starting to bring back that old school look. There's definitely a cultural shift around the world. There seems to be a growing appreciation, which I definitely notice, for old vintage aesthetics. Analog film usually brings a nice authenticity and rawness that we seem to crave behind these screens. I'm a culprit. I obviously use Fujifilm cameras for photography, and I like that grain that I get within the camera. And then when I go to Lightroom, I add a little bit more grain because I love that vintage look. I love that grittiness, the imperfection that it brings to a photo. I'm not too keen on the digital cleanness, that clinicalness that you get from a lot of modern technology. So looking at the grain, the color that is provided from the vintage glass, and obviously like we touched on, that beautiful imperfection. It's something that just can't really be replicated, no matter how many presets, how many LUTs you throw on top of it. I feel like, I mean, obviously, unless you are a master, but there's something about that vintage lens that brings the aesthetics that I just can't find within editing software. And obviously it's trying to be replicated through loads of different things. I use it and all my editing software just to bring the clinicalness down a little touch. Maybe start to look at some of your favorite films that have been released recently or over the years, or music videos, oh God, or other kind of production videos or photography, and maybe start to look at what lenses they've been using, more authenticity to the video or the photo. So not only do the vintage lenses, that vintage glass, bring the aesthetics to your frame, they also bring another benefit of being really practical. To start with, we can start looking at the price of some of these older lenses. Prices don't seem to be that steep. Obviously, when you start looking at some of the more niche ones and more maybe collector's items, the price starts to go up a little bit, and possibly when when content creators or influencers introduce a lens, then the price might go up a tad through inflation, through content creator inflation. But on the whole, vintage lenses aren't too expensive, especially when compared to your modern day counterparts, which can sometimes run you up a load of money, are also usually really well built. The Canon FD SSC series are metal. They seem sturdy, they're heavy. You get that tactile feeling when you're using them, when you're rotating the focus ring, when you're changing the aperture. It feels nice, it sounds nice. It's a more immersive experience when using them. And how easy are they to adapt to your camera? They're so easy. It's easier now more than ever to start adapting vintage glass to your digital cameras through tiny little adapters. You can find them on most websites. For example, right now I'm using an FD to L mount adapter for my Canon lens. And now I have a Canon lens on a Panasonic body. Absolutely wonderful. Cross-system breeding. For me, this starts to open up a whole new world of creative possibilities. When I started to get into old vintage glasses, that's when the experimenting started to happen. I started to realize more and more that I could pop a Canon lens onto my Fujifilm. The combinations started to be endless and opened up a whole new world. Because of affordability, I can now pick up a 50mm for £20 rather than spending £350. Now, obviously, it comes with the caveat of using manual focus. Then that opened up a different corridor for me where I started to learn manual photography. And boy, what a challenge that is. But again, it's more immersive. It brings me into the photography experience a little bit more, which I absolutely love. It's definitely worth considering if you haven't tried it already. So I just wanted to share with you a few little tips and tricks that you could use if you were considering getting into manual photography to use vintage glass. So obviously starting with the biggest one, and that is manual focus in. I would say most vintage lenses don't have autofocus. So you'll need to start to be comfortable using manual focus, using the focus ring, especially when you're out doing street photography. When you're trying to capture that moment, you have to be quick, you have to be alert, you have to be present within the experience, which I find really helpful. Because if I'm using a manual focus lens, then my focus is photography. It is on the camera, it is on my surroundings. I'm like an animal, I'm alert, I'm awake, my eyes are open, I'm fully immersed. Aperture control. A lot of vintage lenses obviously doesn't have the electronic connector to your digital camera. So you might have to go in and manually change it within the camera. But a lot of vintage lenses come with an aperture ring, which you can use. I know for a fact that the Canon one works perfectly on here. It just doesn't say on the camera what aperture I'm at. But if I look down whilst I'm out doing photography, I can see what aperture I'm at. And I tend to stay around the same one if it's a nice day. This gives you a more tactile experience. You get more hands-on. You are more immersed within the photography experience. Slowing it down. Now, I covered this a little bit within the manual focusing. However, when using an old vintage piece of glass, I find that I slow down a little. I find that this is not only just because of the manual focusing, but also because I start to be, and this might sound funny, a little bit more respectful of the lens. This old piece of technology that is attached to the front of my digital camera. I treat it with care and I make sure that every kind of shot is starting to count, just as you would on an analog camera. Now, that's not to say I don't treat my other lenses well. However, I do tend to be more careful with my old glass just because I feel like I can't get another one. Whereas in this day and age, there are hundreds of thousands of lenses being produced every day, week, month, year, and I feel like they're in abundance. However, old school lenses, I don't tend to see too many of them. There only seem to be a few online. So I tend to treat them a little bit better. I tend to treat them a little bit more careful. Embracing the flaws. So don't try to make everything perfect when you're using these lenses. It's definitely part of the charm, definitely part of the character, part of the look that you embrace the imperfections. Embracing the unique quirks of each lens that you use. The flares, the softness, the discoloration, the vignetting, it's all part of it. So start to embrace it. And lastly, exclusivity. I think if you own a camera, or if you're a collector of cameras, or just a collector in general, fun in it is trying to find the lens that no one has. I mean, in this day and age, obviously everything is accessible and everyone has probably used every single lens and it's attainable. However, I'm trying to produce an interesting look within my photos, within my videos, that maybe no one else has. And that's that character we come back to. That's what really appeals to me, that exclusivity of something. That's what makes it fun. And in this day and age, everything is online and everyone is going to the same travel destination and everyone is using the same editing software, and photos and characters might start to feel a little bit samey. Trying to do something a little bit different is becoming harder and harder. So having that tiny little bit of character, that little flaw, that imperfection that might set you apart a little bit, is what's quite exciting and is what a lot of us might be striving for. At the end of the day, the camera and the lens is just a tool. But you've got to like the tools you use. You've got to be comfortable with them and you've got to be excited about picking them up. And that is what interests me with vintage glass. It's exciting to pick it up. I'm excited to use it. And the tool, the camera, the lens, obviously is an extension of ourselves, but we bring the creativity, we bring the creation. So picking up a manual focusing lens, an old piece of glass, start to try challenge yourself possibly a little bit more. Use the glass with that little bit of imperfection. Use the glass with that intolerable flair. And you never know, it could start to push creativity a little bit more. Start mixing it up a little bit. Start using something that's out of your comfort zone and see what you can create. Whether you're after a really distinct look for your photos, for your street photography, or you want to add that extra layer of warmth through the discoloration of a vintage lens. Vintage lenses definitely offer a little bit of charm, a little bit of imperfection that might add a little bit something extra to your creations that modern lenses might possibly not be able to match. And obviously with the resurgence of retro film styles and film edits, cinematic edits, it's really clear this trend isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Definitely recommend using a vintage piece of glass, a manual focusing lens if you haven't already. Just trust me, there's definitely something special about it. Thanks for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments if you've used any vintage glass or lenses, or if you are interested in using them. I'd love to hear from you. So stay creative, get framing, and keep on adventuring on the weathered streets. And keep on adventuring on the weathered streets.